is BBC News. I'm Chris Rogers. Our top stories. The White House denies claims President Trump revealed highly classified information on so-called Islamic State to the Russians and compromised an intelligence source. The serious work in France begins as President Macron appoints his top political team. Ian Brady, one of Britain's most notorious serial killers, has died. He killed 5 children and teenagers in the 1960s with his partner Myra Hindley.
Hello, I'm Sally Bundock with the business stories. So Brexit means what in the UK general election? The Labour Party unveils its manifesto. We weigh up the arguments. And is this the doctor's surgery of the future? We'll be visiting a Californian startup which says it has the recipe for preventative health.
Hello and welcome to BBC News. The Washington Post has published a report claiming President Trump revealed highly classified intelligence to the Russian foreign minister and ambassador to their White House meeting last week. Quoting current and former officials, the paper alleges Mr. Trump gave information about the so-called Islamic State group, supplied to the US by a foreign ally and considered so sensitive, American officials did not even share it widely within the US government. The paper suggests intelligence sources and security relationships with other governments may have been compromised. The US Secretary of State has issued a statement that the President discussed the nature of specific threats, but not sources, methods or military operations. Well, one of the Washington Post reporters that broke the story, Greg Jeff, spoke to the BBC's Kasia Madeira.
Trump, in a meeting with the Russian foreign minister and the Russian ambassador, was describing the threat posed by laptops on airplanes with regard to the Islamic State, and disclosed key sort of details from an intelligence partner that were classified and that he shouldn't have shared with the Russians, and that the partner who shared that information with the United States would certainly be upset about.
And you're saying that discussing such matters for somebody in government would actually be illegal?
It's not illegal, in part because the president can choose to declassify anything, but it's inappropriate.
It's inappropriate. Now, we've seen H.R. McMaster deny this. He said that he was in the room and it didn't happen this way. What's your response to that?
Well, I guess would say 2 things. One would, he said, the president didn't disclose sources or methods, and that's what our story also says. But the nature of the information that the president provided to the Russians would allow them, would allow the Russians to reverse engineer essentially that information to sort of discover the sources and methods. In other words, he said so much that one could figure it out. And then the second thing I would say is, following the meeting, there were messages that went out from the White House, from the NSC, both to the CIA and the National Security Agency, alerting them that this information had been improperly or accidentally disclosed, and to take sort of precautionary measures. So those 2 things suggest that, clearly something of grave concern happened here.
America's National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, who was at the White House meeting, said the Post story is false.
There's nothing that the president takes more seriously than the security of the American people. The story that came out tonight, as reported, is false. The president and the foreign minister reviewed a range of common threats to our 2 countries, including threats to civil aviation. At no time were intelligence sources or methods discussed, and the president did not disclose any military operations that were not already publicly known. 2 other senior officials who were present, including the Secretary of State, remember the meeting the same way and have said so. Their on-the-record accounts should outweigh those of anonymous sources. And I was in the room. It didn't happen. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Well, let's get more now from our Washington bureau. This is the BBC's Rajini Vaidyanathan.
Well, this story has caused a lot of alarm here in Washington for a couple of reasons. Firstly, concern that this sort of information might have been shared, not least from the president himself, but also that it might jeopardise relationships that the US has with key allies when it comes to intelligence sharing. Now, we've heard from people, from politicians from both sides of the political aisle this evening as well. Republican Senator Bob Corker, who chairs the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, said that the White House has got to do something soon to bring itself under control and order. And he said that things in the White House were going in a downward spiral right now. And his opposite number on the Senate Foreign Relations, the Democratic Senator Mark Warner, who sits on the Senate Intelligence Committee, also said that if this is true, it would be a slap in the face to the intelligence community. He said that risking sources is inexcusable. It's worth mentioning that this has all come not even a week after President Trump fired James Comey as the FBI director. And he said that the reason for firing Mr. Comey was nothing to do with the fact that he was overseeing an investigation into whether the Trump campaign had links with Russia. But people here in Washington are saying the timing of this alleged leak, the day after the firing of James Comey, would make this story even more remarkable.
In other news, and on the second day of his presidency, Emmanuel Macron's focus turns to his cabinet. Later, he'll name 15 ministers to carry out his ambitious social and economic reforms. It follows Mr. Macron's visit to Berlin on Monday for talks with the Chancellor Angela Merkel on building closer cooperation between their two countries. More now from Sarah Corker.
Emmanuel Macron got a warm welcome in the German capital. The leaders of the Eurozone's two biggest economies appeared to be in step. They share a true belief in the European Union. The Macron-Merkel meeting symbolised a strengthening of the Franco-German alliance. Their message was, we'll shake up Europe.
Je me réjouis que nous puissions ensemble.
I'm happy that we can, with our teams, work together on a project, including in the medium term, on a common roadmap for the European Union. These are issues of extreme importance. We saw it in these last years. You yourself, as Chancellor, have had to manage this. This is also the opinion of our fellow citizens, and for whom profound reforms are necessary.
The new power couple of the EU haven't always agreed on how to reform the Eurozone, but promise deeper cooperation. Well, Mr. Macron's attention now turns to completing his cabinet of 15 ministers. He's already chosen the Conservative Edouard Philippe as Prime Minister. He told French media he thought hard about accepting the job.
I think it's a decision that no Prime Minister takes lightly, even more so at this time, taking into account the situation in which our country finds itself, threatened, sometimes damaged, worried. There's never been this much anger in France.
The 46-year-old mayor isn't from Mr. Macron's party, but from the centre-right Republicans. Mr. Macron's cabinet will seek to bridge the political divide. Some names mooted include centrist François Bayrou, the MEP Sylvie Goulard, and the current Defence Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian. Expect established politicians, economists and entrepreneurs, while Mr. Macron has also previously promised to appoint more women to senior positions. These appointments are crucial for the president, who needs to do well in next month's parliamentary elections to push through his economic reforms. Sarah Corker, BBC News.
Sally's joined us in the studio, which means it must be business time. What have you got for us, Sally?
We are today looking ahead to the UK Labour Party's manifesto, which they are releasing later ahead of the general election in the UK. Now, although the formal announcement is expected in a few hours, last week, a leaked copy of the document revealed Labour's plans to scrap the government's existing white paper on Brexit negotiations. Now, the Conservative manifesto is expected in the next few days as well. So where do the two parties stand on Brexit? We've been weighing up the arguments. So the Labour Party favours, it says, managed migration, but will stop short of committing to specific immigration targets, unlike the Conservatives, who've pledged to limit net migration to the tens of thousands. Jeremy Corbyn's party says it wants to retain the benefits of the European single market and will negotiate on that basis. By contrast, Theresa May's Conservative Party has suggested it's prepared to take the UK out of the single market if necessary. Labour's also rejected the idea Britain can leave the European Union without first agreeing a formal trade agreement, while Theresa May is saying no deal is better than a bad deal. So we're specifically looking at the two parties' ideas about Brexit, and we'll be getting a view from both sides in World Business Report. Also, we shall give you a sneak preview of a startup firm based in California. It's describing itself as the future of healthcare. It uses a lot of tech and automation in a doctor's surgery to try and diagnose a patient's conditions. So we'll have a report from our technology correspondent based out there, that's Dave Lee, of course, who's been trying it out, and we'll have all the other business stories as well. It's reported in the press that Ford may be slashing 10% of its global workforce. That's a lot of people. So all that and more business in around about 20 minutes. I'll see you soon.
Wow, I'm exhausted listening to you. That's a busy business day, isn't it? More from Sally later. We'll also be looking at how other stories around the world have been reported on as well. Let's have a look at some developments coming into the BBC newsroom right now, though. And the United Nations Security Council has strongly condemned North Korea's recent ballistic missile test. A unanimous statement, backed by China, North Korea's closest ally, promises tougher sanctions. North Korea says the missile it tested successfully on Sunday was a new type of mid to long-range rocket capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. An award-winning Mexican journalist who reported extensively on the activities of drug cartels has been murdered. Javier Valdez was killed by gunmen who opened fire on his car as he travelled to work. 4 journalists have been killed in Mexico in just the past 2 months. Facebook is still available in Thailand after concerns arose that authorities would shut it down if Facebook did not take down content deemed threatening to national security. Thailand's telecoms regulator said last week it would give Facebook Thailand until Tuesday to take down 131 web addresses with content deemed threatening to security or which violated strict lèse-majesté laws. The United States claims to have evidence that Syria has built a crematorium at a military prison just north of Damascus, where large numbers of people have been held during the bitter civil war. The State Department is accusing the regime of President Bashar al-Assad of attempting to cover up mass killings. Andy Beat reports.
Throughout Syria's 6-year civil war, President Assad's regime has been accused of committing atrocities and war crimes by the international community. Sednaya prison has been described as a human slaughterhouse, a place where up to 13,000 people have been executed, according to rights groups. Now further allegations of abuse have emerged.
Credible sources have believed that many of the bodies have been disposed in mass graves. We now believe that the Syrian regime has installed a crematorium in the Sednaya prison complex, which could dispose of detainees' remains with little evidence. Although the regime's many atrocities are well documented, we believe that the building of a crematorium is an effort to cover up the extent of mass murders taking place in Sednaya prison.
Washington says these satellite images of the prison support its claims, and even that the atrocities had been carried out with what appeared to be unconditional support from Russia and Iran. The Syrian regime hasn't responded to these latest allegations, but in the past has strongly denied any abuse at the jail. Andy Beat, BBC News.
Do stay with us here at BBC News if you can. Coming up, it's not long until the snap general election, but spare a thought for those who have to make the traditional rosettes. The pressure is on. We'll hear from them a bit later.
The Pope was shot, the Pope will live. That's the essence of the appalling news from Rome this afternoon, that, as an Italian television commentator put it, terrorism had come to the Vatican.
The man they called the Butcher of Lyon, Klaus Barbie, went on trial today in the French town where he was the Gestapo chief in the Second World War.
Winnie Mandela never looked like a woman just sentenced to 6 years in jail. The judge told Mrs. Mandela there was no indication she felt even the slightest remorse.
The Chinese government has called for an all-out effort to help the victims of a powerful earthquake, the worst to hit the country for 30 years.
The computer Deep Blue has tonight triumphed over the world chess champion Garry Kasparov. It's the first time a machine has defeated a reigning world champion in a classical chess match.
America's first legal same-sex marriages have been taking place in Massachusetts.
God bless America!
This is BBC News. Let's have a look at the latest headlines now. The Washington Post claims President Trump revealed highly classified information to Russia and possibly compromised an intelligence source. The White House says no sources or methods were revealed. Serious work in France begins as President Macron appoints his top political team. Mr. Macron has already named Edouard Philippe of the centre-right Republicans Party as his Prime Minister. One of Britain's most infamous serial killers, the Moors murderer Ian Brady, has died. He and his partner Myra Hindley tortured and murdered 5 children in the 1960s. Ian Brady has been receiving palliative care at a high-security psychiatric unit. Daniel Sanford reports.
Few murders, before or since, have caused such revulsion. The discovery of children's bodies on Saddleworth Moor left the public wondering who could commit such dreadful crimes and why. Ian Brady was a petty criminal who grew up in Glasgow, where he's remembered for his cruelty to other children and animals. He later took a job in Manchester, and when his company hired a new typist called Myra Hindley, the couple became lovers, and Brady led her into a world of sadism. Outwardly a normal couple, they became serial killers, abducting, sexually assaulting, and murdering children. When Brady and Hindley were arrested, they said nothing, challenging detectives to prove their guilt. They remained silent even when police had found 3 children's bodies in shallow graves on Saddleworth Moor. Years later, Brady told the BBC his remorse for the crimes was painfully deep, but he could never explain his motive. Until her death in 2002, his accomplice blamed him, but if anything, she became the greater hate figure.
He, in many ways, escaped some of the disgust that the public should feel for him because he was accompanied by a woman, and I'm not sure that he got his fair share of public hatred.
In the 1980s, the 2 killers made full confessions and went back to the moors separately to help the search for other victims. Pauline Reed's body was eventually recovered, but Keith Bennett's grave was never found.
I wanted one of them to come up with the truth so I could nail the 2 of them. Nail them for the rest of their life like they'd nail me down. I wanted them prosecuted for Keith's death.
Winnie Johnson died in 2012, regretting to the end that she'd been unable to give her son a Christian burial. Brady spent the last years of his life in Ashworth High Security Mental Hospital. In 1999, he decided to die and stopped eating, so doctors force-fed him using a tube. He wrote many letters to the BBC complaining about his treatment, and in 2012 unsuccessfully petitioned to be returned to a normal prison. He continued to vent his anger at Myra Hindley for trying to minimise her role in the Moors murders. Although Ian Brady's crimes now belong to another era, they will be recorded as among the most infamous ever seen in Britain.
The King of Jordan is inaugurating a new science laboratory today that, it is hoped, will promote collaborative research across the Middle East. Known as Sesame, the lab has faced formidable hurdles. From Jordan, here's our science editor, David Shukman.
I'm in Jordan at a new research centre called Sesame, and around me is a machine called a synchrotron. It acts as an incredibly powerful microscope. Well, what's the big deal, you might think? Well, listen to some of the countries involved in this project. There's Jordan, of course, Egypt, Turkey, Cyprus, Iran, and, amazingly, Israel as well. Now, one of the people who's been steering this project to fruition is Chris Llewellyn-Smith, a British physicist. How amazed are you, given the sort of countries involved, given how hostile they can be to each other, that here you are today, the thing is starting to work?
The scientists involved in Sesame overlook the politics. They work together as scientists, producing a facility that they want to use. If it's a time of particular tension in the region, of course, it can feel a little bit uncomfortable. But nothing serious has happened. In fact, I've often asked, what was the effect of the Arab Spring? And one of the effects was everybody was in financial difficulty, of course, but the only direct one was when a group of countries agreed to put special funding into Sesame. Just before they signed up, the government changed in Egypt, and they never came on board because it kept changing. But otherwise, we've overcome these difficulties.
But did you ever, I don't know, wake up in the morning, hear the news of some new conflict in the Middle East, some new source of tension, and think, surely the various partners will have to walk away now?
Not really, because I'd understood meeting them that they want this to happen, at least at the level of the scientists. The real problem has been finding the money. The countries in this region have science budgets that you can hardly see with a microscope, most of them. There have been many times in the history of this project where a rational person would have said, let's give up. But it seems so important, we kept going, and here we are today. We're launching the project, albeit with minimal supporting infrastructure, but it's going to work, it's producing science. It's a very great moment.
Do you have to pinch yourselves now and again that actually you've pulled it off?
I suppose so, but that would sound a little bit arrogant.
Congratulations. Chris Llewellyn-Smith there, thanks very much indeed. So the real test comes now when teams of Iranian, Israeli, Palestinian, Turkish scientists all come here to use the facility, and it's meant to run for many years.
Let's have a look at some sport now. And in tennis, Roger Federer has pulled out of the French Open with less than 2 weeks to go until the second Grand Slam of the year. The world number 5 says he'll sit out the tournament so he can concentrate on the grass and hard court seasons. Maria Sharapova has guaranteed herself a place in Wimbledon's qualifying tournament. She won her first round match at the Rome Open. A straight sets win over the American Christine McHale means that she'll have enough ranking points to attempt to qualify for this year's tournament at the All England Club. Now, if she reaches the semi-finals in Rome, the 5-time Grand Slam champion will qualify outright for Wimbledon's main draw. So, Britain goes to the polls in just over 3 weeks' time in that snap general election, but the sudden timing of the poll has meant hours of extra work for some companies it may not have thought about. The BBC's Jane McCummon went to see some rosette manufacturers, for example, who are working frantically to meet demand.
Do you remember when you heard about the election and what you thought?
Yeah, but you can't transmit it. I won't repeat what I thought.
It was announced, I think it was about 11:15, something like that, and I just sat and thought, oh my God.
God, how much work have we got to do?
They're one of the biggest rosette manufacturers in the country. Lots of experience, but no experience of a snap general election.
Pressure, pressure, an OMG moment, is it here? More, more, more. Yes. Now, Cass, is that order going today?
No.
No?
Big boss David Wallace is a bit excited by the whole thing. You've got a bit of a push on.
We certainly have. I can't believe it. Where's this come from? The busiest time of our traditional season, the politicians decide to throw this one into the mix. We don't know what day of the week it is at the moment.
Their traditional season ties into all those wonderful British traditions. Whether it's a rosette to adorn a prize cow, a horse which can really jump, a best-in-show dog, the best-in-league teams. But rosettes have always been a feature of the campaign trail, associated, of course, with party colours, but also with winning. But the running time this time is a little, well, short of time. With just a few weeks' notice, they're likely to produce 50,000 rosettes here. They're used to at least 3 months' notice. So, no sick leave, no holidays?
No, not allowed to be sick. We're to bring the all the intravenous strips and everything else in with us.
Is there time to think about who you're going to vote for?
In all honesty, no. I haven't had time, no.
so they are bagged up, boxed up and ready to hit the campaign trail. A few miles away at their ribbon suppliers, the mood is similarly stressed.
Change the plan.
Drop everything.
Drop everything, change the plan, replan. We knew that the pressure would be on.
Coles fabrics have been weaving for over 100 years. This will be their 10th snap election, but certainly not their last rosette order.
It's quite an antiquated product, isn't it? It's quite old-fashioned. Is it going to see its day?
I don't think it's old-fashioned. I think it's a great product. There was a lot of football rosettes worn. People in those days used to pin on a rosette and have a football rattle. And okay, that changed. Football shirts, advertising, etc., etc. I can't see the same being true of political parties. They like rosettes. They like awards. Showing a rosette has got something prestigious about it.
Perhaps a rosette says winning, in a way a common tin badge never could do.
Now, we've just got to think of a manifesto.
Oi, back to work you lot. Jay McCubbin, BBC News.
Well, that's the latest for now. I'll be back with the headlines, a look at the newspapers around the world, and also Sally will be here with the business news very shortly as well. Don't go away.